So I'm going to introduce myself. So hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. And thank you especially to Verena for inviting me to give this talk. My name is Ian.Keaveny. I live in rural Ireland and I work under the name CrashStop. I'm a glitch artist who works primarily with open source or Libre software. I'm also an associate member of Format C, and Dina is also part of Format C as well, who's here today, which is a non-profit artist organization based in Zagreb, Croatia, active in the area of visual and multimedia art, which also hosts and runs the biggest and longest continuously running festival of glitch art in the world, FUB. Format C is supported by the Ministry of Culture in Croatia. So most of us making or studying glitch art have a glitch art origin story where we notice and then become fascinated by glitch. It might be through machine malfunction, a blue screen of death, broken images recovered from a failed hard drive, a rhythmically skipping CD or a mangled image file downloaded from a camera that suddenly changes from being a banal family photo into something new and compelling, or a satellite signal drops out and reveals a new landscape in which faces melt into each other and narrative is halted and slowly lost. We only notice the technology that surrounds us when that technology works in a way other than expected. Loss can lead to transformation. Glitch art works by understanding, replicating, and expanding those transformations. And in that process, and glitch art is very much a process, reveals the fragility of digital media and the cultural and technological assumptions digital media stems from. Digital art is inherently fragile. To make digital art is to work with loss. We change computers, we change operating systems, equipment fails, software that we use either becomes updated so it doesn't have the same functionality or won't work unless we upgrade to a newer machine. The environment where our work lives is also fragile. Websites and social media companies change moderation policies. Social media sites may vanish, taking down whole swathes of work, or I may not keep up the hosting fees and my carefully constructed website might disappear. The environment in which we work is in a state of constant flux. The one constant in making digital art is change and loss. Part of control must be about archiving, not only work, but software and hardware. A lot of what I do as an artist revolves around researching older versions of Linux and how it interacts with various hardware and file formats. To that end, I collect and maintain an archive of older machines and software, as well as maintaining an archive of my own work and techniques. You can see some of my computers behind me. There is a paradox at the heart of what I do. I embrace loss within my own processes, but try to reduce it in the archiving of my own work. Knowing that all digital work tends towards entropy and the ideas of permanence are futile. So now, a quick discussion of generational loss. This is actually inspired by talking to Nicholas. Far from being a perfect record, a digital file is often compressed or lossy, subject to bit rot or corruption over time, susceptible to being lost, overwritten, or destroyed by hard drive failure. Files may live on in online copies on Google Drive or via Instagram, which can itself inadvertently glitch images. And of course, we have, everybody's seen this, the classic Instagram glitch. Facebook or whichever social media network survives the next few years, but those copies are often different to the originals due to the differing ways that social media networks compress images. Facebook's compression algorithm is especially egregious. So in effect, these are copies of copies of copies, and many people have experimented with repeatedly uploading and downloading images and videos to demonstrate this or work with it. So, for instance, to quote from a Gizmodo article from 2015 on Pete Ashton's I Am Sitting in Stagram, with a nod to loss, this article can only be accessed via archive.org's Wayback Machine. And yeah. Artist and photographer Pete Ashton has sped up this gradual disintegration process in his recent project entitled I Am Sitting in Stagram. He began with a single photo, uploaded it to Instagram, took an unfiltered screenshot and reposted the resulting image, repeating the process 90 times to produce an effect akin to the real-life aging process. So this is Pete Ashton's Lucier grid. This work in turn was inspired by the work of composer Alvin Lucier, thus Lucier grid, specifically his work, I Am Sitting in a Room, and from the Wikipedia article on that work. The piece features Lucier recording himself narrating a text and then playing the tape recording back into the room, re-recording it. The new recording is then played back and re-recorded, and this process is repeated. Due to the room's particular size and geometry, certain frequencies of the recording are emphasized while others are attenuated. Eventually, the words become unintelligible, replaced by the characteristic resonant frequencies of the room itself. There's also a video homage to Lucier's work by Patrick Liddell, which illustrates video decay via YouTube upload and download. This is called Video Room 1000. Now, if this plays, it'll be a miracle. I did.
Ian, there is no sound. Is this part of the concept?
No, there should be sound, but I think we'll just have to work with that.
Let's try it again.
Yeah.
If you don't share the sound when you switch to share your screen for the video, it won't share the sound.
Okay, that's fine. We'll go with that. It's a glitch. It's more interesting the actual artifacts that build up over time.
Is this part of the concept that the sound is coming and going?
No, the sound gets disintegrated over time. I'm more interested in the visual aspects, though.
Okay, that's great. Okay, it's amazing. He disappears. He's a ghost, huh?
Yeah.
I love it.
And it just gradually disintegrates. By the time you get to about the 1000th, we just have blobs. Okay. So, there are technical explanations around generational loss with JPEGs, which explain what is happening each time we save a JPEG, but we'll go with Wikipedia's definition. So, generation loss, to quote from that article, generation loss is the loss of quality between subsequent copies or transcodes of data. Anything that reduces the quality of the representation when copying and would cause further reduction in quality on making a copy of the copy can be considered a form of generation loss. File size increases are a common result of generation loss, as the introduction of artifacts may actually increase the entropy of the data through each generation. In their work, Alvin Lucier, Pete Ashton, and Patrick Liddell are not talking about loss as a bad thing, rather than loss becomes the basis of the work, in a similar way to the use of feedback in analog video art, where a screen and a camera gradually interact to create new, unique, ever-changing work. Each copying or sharing of a work changes it subtly, in effect creating a new work, or as I'll talk about later, a remix. Digital work may be inherently fragile, but it is also inherently mutable. Loss, rather than being an enemy, can also be a useful tool. Control of that process is via the environment it lives in, be it storage, the internet, the work itself, as well as setting the conditions under which that work can be reused. And there are other forms of loss to consider. Where you display your work determines the quality it's seen at. Facebook, as I said, has a notoriously bad image compression, and videos uploaded there can be really badly artifacted. You could ask, but don't we want this? Yes, but the artifacts we want to see are the ones we generate, though allowing for the happy accident. and working with the internet as a medium, there are limits to how much we want these happy accidents to remake the work. Instagram stubbornly insists on a square format, which in itself influences the work we make and post. A landscape image becomes a square selection of part of an image. So loss is inherent in that platform, which also does not allow for posting GIFs and has a narrow range of video codec options. The texture is some work relying on a specific codec for impact or texture. See the differences in texture between H.261, H.264, or WebP OGV, for example. But to mitigate that loss, we begin to use that format to our advantage. And I'll talk about this later. See Chan Something Star's Baobab Users project, where both the format of Instagram and the format of smartphone galleries, screenshotting and cropping, is used to its fullest extent, reflecting online culture in a collision of collected or shared images. Personal photographs, memes, and underground stars, reflecting a stream of consciousness poetry, which is like watching the internet dreaming and thinking. So we also have to consider generation loss via platforms and within online communities. Glitch art lives on the internet, but websites disappear or appear. Content moderation policies change, website ownerships change. Tumblr, arguably one of the birthplaces and incubators of glitch art as we know it now, passes through different hands and new owners ban content that they deemed to be not safe for work. YouTube content disappears in a haze of copyright strikes or is rendered unviewable by constant ad breaks. The job of an artist who exists to any degree online is to manage what happens when content policies change or websites disappear. Controller's loss is what we do. When Tumblr policies changed after it was bought by Verizon, leading to mass takedowns of blogs in 2018, the Internet Archive swung into action to try and save many of these blogs, but much good online work was lost, distorting the space that was Tumblr and the narrative conversations going on within glitch art. These works might exist on the artist's hard drives, but often those making this work don't back up their work. One of our primary responsibilities as artists working on the internet must be to archive and keep our own work safe, and also to start building mechanisms to save the work of others we and the wider community see as important. We can't expect the traditional art world or art historians to do this for us because they either don't care, aren't looking in the right places, or don't know what to look for in the first place. These spaces move so quickly, we can't wait for hindsight, academia, or others to write and preserve our history for us, because by then it might be gone. The frankly odd moderation policies on nudity, or that defined nebulously as not safe for work on Facebook and Instagram, lead to strange situations like shadow banning. So the definition of shadow banning on Wikipedia is shadow banning is also called stealth banning, hell banning, and ghost banning, and comment ghosting. And it's the practice of blocking or partially blocking a user or the user's content from some areas of an online community in such a way that the ban is not readily apparent to the user, regardless of whether the action is taken by an individual or an algorithm. For example, shadow banned comments posted to a blog or media website would be visible to the sender, but not to other users accessing the site. Many glitch artists, like myself, will use a pseudonym, not something Meta or other platforms approve of. And they will try anything to get you to use a real name or interact more fully with the platform, even though you may only be there for that one group. It soon becomes obvious to a user when shadow banning is happening to their account. It's happened to me. Pseudonyms are an important part of glitch art. They allow artists to take on personas for safety reasons, or that reflect better their idea of self, gender identity, or to take on a degree of anonymity which separates personhood from work. Glitch art is a great community for allowing us to be who we are, rather than our given or assumed roles in real life. Shadow banning becomes problematic when it forces us to give up identities we have fought hard to take on as our own. These kind of bans make the communities themselves a less vibrant and inclusive place, as much of what is termed not safe for work or falls foul of content moderation algorithms is often work by marginalized and more diverse communities. Communities such as queer or trans, which have been the bedrock on which movements like glitch art have been built. For them to be excluded or shadow banned from platforms make movements like ours poorer. If you don't control the platform controls you, and we lose the richness and the diversity of what makes our online communities great in the first place. It's the digital equivalent of gentrification. There are good decentralized, and I don't mean in the NFT sense, Fediverse alternatives to mainstream social media sites such as PeerTube, a YouTube alternative, Mastodon, a good alternative to Twitter, PixelFed, an Instagram alternative. But I'm not going to talk about those now, but they are good directions to go in to take back ownership of our own social online presence. So, working with loss. The work I'm currently making embraces loss by purposefully shrinking images down to a fraction of their original resolution and then blowing them back up again to work with those artifacts created in that transition, and then turning those images into grids which are mirrored and cropped and rebuilt. Originally, these works started as an attempt to replicate the methodology of Xavier Dallet and his Baobab users project. So that's a slide of that. And specifically, the grid structure that they use and the repetition I find appealing, which derives from using smartphones to build sets of images and meaning passed between users via the Messenger platform. I wanted to do that on a desktop rather than smartphone, so I created a set of bash scripts to replicate that, which led me finally to find a basic set of images like these from the ICE window manager as starting points. These are already at a small resolution, typically between 32 by 32 or 16 by 16 pixels. I transcoded those from JPEG to PVM, black and white bitmap, then made repeating grids. These are those transcoded right down to 10 by 10 pixels. And also they're in black and white, so they just lose practically all meaning. So eventually I made grids with them like this. For the process I created, which takes groups of images and grids and crops them randomly into smaller and smaller grids within a larger grid, started me exploring what could be done by shrinking images down deliberately, almost to the point where they lose meaning and become just material. Doing this, I found creates small islands of distortion around which further techniques anchor themselves, something I've experimented with before, but I'll explain that in a little bit. As an example, I can scrape the images from a news website. We'll talk Spiegel culture. So these are the images that I scraped. And we can reduce those images in size to 80 by 80 pixels from their original sizes and make them square. So we get kind of almost the kind of reading of the images disappeared. And just for context, this is the original size that image was at. So you can see how much detail you've actually lost. And then we can rearrange those blocks of pixels in a specific way and use gimmick to displace originals against that output. So using scripts, we reduce the image down to very, very small size, then run them through another script, which splits the images into blocks. And then we run gimmick against that, which is basically a form of displacement. But there's also another technique we could use, which works really well with shrunk down images. Something I was talking to Verena about. I showed her the computer this was done on. So there's a specific fault that I discovered a few years ago with ATI graphics cards and a very, very old version of Linux Mint called Bear 2.1, which is from 2006. And if you run any image through it or any video through it, you get this kind of effect. And the effect is kind of dependent on the resolution of the starting point of the original image. And we could also do that with video. So we can take Japan's Ghost original, if this all runs. So, and we can run the video through that.
I love it.
There should be sound with this, but if there isn't, then we'll just go with that. But if we look at the original of that, if we can actually find it. Yeah, there we go. So this is the original that was based on. There's no sound on this one again. So, as I say, we can take this original and play it through the other computer, which has the graphic floor in it, and record the output. And we can also do something more interesting using the other techniques, where, oh, come on. So, as I say, we can reduce those pixels, the original pictures from those down from 640 by 480 to 20 by 20 pixels. So what I did was I took the video, divided it into stills. I actually had to double the amount of stills for the technique, and then displace every other still against its previous still, and then colorize them using another technique, and then recombine all of those into a new work, and also with new audio as well. So we can combine lots of techniques. Pity you won't hear the sound on this one. So there's something like 10,000 stills to create this. So there's this kind of uncanny edge you get when you reduce something down to its almost incomprehensibility. They're just on the edge of being viewable or readable. And they take on this ghostly kind of strange aspect, which I really like. But you can only do that if they're shrunk down.
It's very, very beautiful. Thank you for that. Wow.
Okay. So just to illustrate the difference without
it's
and with.
beautiful. It's rosa.
Ah,
It's nice to be connected like this.
So just to illustrate the difference with and without the ATI graphics card. So this is Linux Mint BIA 2.1 without the ATI graphics card. This is just standard Intel graphics. And you get, it just looks normal. It's boring. It's just a standard desktop for Linux. But with ATI graphics card, we get this mad coloration. And that's just straight off. That's a straight screenshot. There's no alteration to the graphics card whatsoever. This is the interference pattern you'll get. And it's repeatable. So these are images with the graphics card again. All right. So, yeah. So if you run just standard images through it, reduced down to 256 by 256 or even 80 by 80, more interesting things happen. So we can get images like this. Lower resolutions equal more artifacts. So as a change resolution, the artifacts created change. Each new technique used, adding to those artifacts like wind blowing sand around obstacles in real life. And we can also do something like this, where we can cut up the images. So, or we could just cut the original images up and attempt to reassemble them. And this is a technique I've started to use a lot more of late. This is not the ATI graphics card era. This is just standard cutting up via script. It's useful as a technique in its own right, but also for creating displacement maps in scripts. This script happened by accident. I was actually trying to create a simple cut up and rejoin routine, and to test that I worked on this process, which didn't work how I intended, but I like what it does anyway. So we, as I say, we can use those as output as displacement maps for the original. So we can displace the original cut up images against each other again. So loss or reduction of quality can lead to a rich breeding ground for artifacts, and discovering and exploring these flaws had a serious effect on how I viewed resolution and quality. The lower the resolution, the more interesting things became for me when working in this way. So these images were made on a Dell Wise 5010 DXOD thin client from 2016 with an AMD G248E APU. Earlier versions of this technique used a standard mid-2000s mini ATX motherboard and AMD Radeon HD 3650 AGB graphics card. These give different colors and effects, and depending on which motherboard you use, you get different background colors. The hardware was not altered in any way, and these images are direct output as seen on the screen. And this effect can also be replicated with variations in more modern versions of Linux, such as GUINOS Chimera. So, to return to the theme of this talk, part of our work as artists is to fight against the entropy of generational loss. We keep copies of work on hard drives, have backup strategies to keep our originals intact. All the while, these images are being accessed, changed, uploaded, downloaded, and remixed. An image on the internet is always changing, its meaning changing with each iteration, context, or even the device it is viewed on. Whatever we think about copyright or ownership, an image or video or file on the internet is always a remix away from being turned into something else. It is a thing in itself, but it is also a base material. To work in this environment means giving up a large degree of control. But how then do we retain authorship of anything, if anything can be copied and remixed? Essentially, we have to change our ideas of what authorship and ownership mean. Controlling work online is a losing game unless we take lessons from the open source and free software movement. One way of controlling authorship is by giving others the right to use a work, remix it, or keep a copy of it, as long as those others grant the same rights to others if they make work based on what I have made. A culture of sharing rather than denying, and it's also legally binding, which fosters rather than restricts. To gain control, we must lose control and give up on the now absurd idea of a unique or investment work beloved of the old art establishment. Which leads us on to scarcity value. And as a side note, NFTs also slyly acknowledge this absurdity while still charging for files and editions, similar to the way that artist printmakers print limited editions, giving the illusion of ownership via blockchain ledger entries and the notional passing of notional money, cryptocurrency. Most of the ideas that underpin these markets reflect old world art practices and fight against the reality of digital art, which is that if it is on a screen or a device or in an accessible file, it can be copied, remixed, shared as part of a cultural commons. Traditional printmakers may make a limited edition of prints from their own original plates for sale, the value of those prints reflecting their scarcity. The printmaker could still run off a few hundred extra prints, which could be sold, but that would reduce the artificial scarcity value on which the old art gallery system establishment works, and which controls artists and what is seen and valued culturally and monetarily. Which moves us on to the idea of making new Warhols. In a particularly interesting turn of events, the artist Paul Stevenson tracked down original Andy Warhol acetates and made new Warhol works. And this is from the BBC article from 2017 about this. Stevenson has made new versions of Warhol works by posthumously tracking down the pop artist's original acetates, paints, and printer, and recreating the entire process as precisely as possible. And while Warhol's assistants did many parts of the physical work, the artist, who died in 1987, was the only one who worked directly on these acetates, touching up parts of the portraits to prepare them for printing. Stevenson took the acetates to one of Warhol's original screen printers in New York, Alexandra Henrici, who offered to help use them to make new paintings. An artist's value as a commodity for investment and speculation increases after death. And to be able to print new works to satisfy demand seems logical from a money-making perspective. But what does it say about authorship and the ethical state of the art market itself? In a way, I can only applaud the artist doing this, as eventually it will reduce the monetary value of all Warhol works. And Warhol would probably be quite amused and approving of this making of new works. But old world copyright laws might have something to say about that. Scarcity value and ownership could be viewed as anti-cultural and anti-society. To be a digital artist also means to acknowledge the absurdity of the original unique work and questions interacting with the old art world, the need for commercial galleries, or even the notion of curatorship. As in the online communities where we work, such as the Glitch Artists Collective Network, we become self-organizing and self-curating. So the festivals such as the Wrong Biennale, Glitch Art is Dead, FUB, Glitch Art Brazil, and many others. There is a parallel self-curating and self-organizing within the NFT space, but my take on it is that though laudable from a community aspect, ultimately these are only seeking legitimacy from or aping pre-existing structures within the traditional art market. They are less about creating or reflecting a shared cultural commons, and more about money and reputation and the next generation of investable art stars. Reject the notion of scarcity, foster abundance. I share my work under Creative Commons licenses, CC by NCSA 40, which states, you are free to copy and redistribute the material in any medium or format. You are free to adapt, remix, transform, and build upon the material under these terms and conditions. I won't read them all out, but you can read them there now. This aspect of sharing and remixing is fundamental to glitch art. Though not many artists use Creative Commons licenses, there is an unwritten understanding that sharing and remixing is good, both in source material, final work, in that any digital work can be final, and the sharing of techniques, software, and scripts. My work is made using pretty much entirely free or Libre software, which relies on an open and free software ecosystem, and it's one I strongly believe in and advocate for. Creative Commons goes hand in hand with it, Libre software being founded on the principles of the Free Software Foundation and its list of software freedoms, which are the 4 freedoms. The freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose, the freedom to study how the program works and change it, the freedom to redistribute copies so you can help your neighbors, the freedom to distribute copies of your modified versions to others. And there's also a definition that you could apply to culture. So a definition for cultural values, cultural works. I'm going to read those out properly. So the first freedom, the freedom to use the work and enjoy the benefits of using it. The freedom to study the work and to apply knowledge acquired from it. The freedom to make and redistribute copies in whole or in part of the information or expression. The freedom to make changes and improvements and to distribute derivative works. To sum up, control of authorship other than attribution and crediting the original source does not exist within digital art, other than through peer pressure, which often states it's okay to remix, but wrong to steal and claim work as your own. We could fight to control our work and our ownership of an image or a video or a music file, a document, whatever, but ultimately there is a copy of that somewhere someone has made for their own use and purposes. But as I believe in remix culture and the idea that culture and art should be available, that is a problem only if we adhere to the old ideas of copyright and ownership. If a digital file is not a thing, who can truly own what is intangible? This attitude also reflects a culture of realism. Most of us who make art will not make money from it, or even be able to support ourselves through it, instead taking up jobs outside of art in teaching, research, or looking for funding through grants, residencies, etc., or working completely outside of the art world. That also makes us free to make the work we want to. It does not make the work we make any less valid, far from it. It allows us to work freely outside of old establishments and paradigms which no longer understand or serve us. Free to create newer, more relevant structures which operate along lines of a culture of abundance, sharing, and a more open access to the means of artistic production and dissemination. It allows us to build a cultural commons where work has value for what it is rather than how much it is worth or a received assignment of value. Because seriously, who goes to galleries? Contrast the number of people who wouldn't be seen dead in a gallery but will quite happily look at work on their devices. Definitions of art have changed with the onset of the internet, and the audience has grown, and often the audience makes art in response to what they see. They don't just passively receive it. We, as the makers and consumers, define what it is rather than old institutions and vested interests. It is an alive thing rather than a dead thing to be studied and dissected. So, towards a cultural commons. Lawrence Lessig is the originator of Creative Commons, and from Creative Commons we can infer the idea of a cultural commons, where art, culture and learning are shared and valued without ideas of scarcity, value and ownership. Something which already exists at the heart of glitch art, where ideas, techniques and work are shared freely and openly. And from Lawrence Lessig, we could also get the formulation of ideas and discussion around the idea of remix culture through his book, Remix, Making Art and Commerce Thrive in the Hybrid Economy. What is remix culture, and why do I say everything is a remix? If we talk about generational loss, then the remix element is obvious, as a file is physically copied, recopied and remixed by transmission. In terms of culture itself, it's the act of taking a pre-existing work or idea and making something with that. In glitch art, the use of archive.org is near ubiquitous as a source of material, much of it out of copyright or public domain, and it is safer to remix a work that's public domain. It stops all sorts of problems with YouTube. Or say a photo library like Pixabay. We could also consider collage art as a precursor to glitch art, in that pre-existing works are used and recontextualized through deconstruction and the reassignment of meaning through proximity beyond the inadvertent remixes engendered by device or generational loss. Remix culture is the heart of any art going back to the Renaissance or further. Each generation looks at a previous generation's work and borrows themes, iconography, techniques, or just plain copies. As Lawrence Lessig states, I've described what I mean by remix by describing a bit of its practice. Whether text or beyond text, remix is collage. It comes from combining elements of read-only culture. It succeeds by leveraging the meaning created by the reference to build something new. There are two goods that remix creates, at least for us or for our kids. At least now one is the good of community, the other is education. He goes on to say, remixes happen within a community of remixers. In the digital age, that community can be spread around the world. Members of that community create in part for one another. They're showing one another how they can create, as kids on a skateboard are showing their friends how they can create. That showing is valuable, even when the stuff produced is not. Glitch art is fundamentally a community, people sharing their latest technique or work, trying to one-up each other. But it is also an inviting community in a way that traditional art communities are often not. In the example I showed towards the beginning of this talk, I scraped the images from a website, downloaded the copyright images and turned them into something new. Who then owns these images? And at what point does a remix become a new work? If everything can be looked at as a source material, who owns it? My answer to that question is that we all do. If we look at cultural hoarding and gatekeeping in the old art world as a cultural loss for all of us, then remixing, allied with the free software movement and Creative Commons, could be seen as a cultural gain, expanding as it does the access to tools, audience, and participation. But this also implies a duty on us as artists to further participation, inclusivity, curatorship, and opportunity. But we must also be wary of creeping academicization, the need to study, dissect, and classify within terms the establishment understands and can use to co-opt, curate, and fit within an old world art narrative. We must forcefully resist this by writing our own histories, our own studies, and our own narratives, and this is work which is already underway. Getting back to the theme beyond the philosophical implications. With glitch art, we often work in ways that turn the idea of control on its head. If control means retaining everything, including physical objects, all the information, all the detail, if anything, glitch art reflects the idea that loss is an integral part of existence, and to try and hold on to anything is a losing game. Digital art exists in an inherently fragile ecosystem. Without power, it doesn't exist, or rather it does, but as the inaccessible content of hard drives or remote servers. Without power, it cannot be seen. Without networks, it cannot propagate. I make work which realistically will sooner or later disappear, and probably more completely than previous generations of artists' work. So we may be one of the first generations of artists in recent history to leave no trace of our work, other than the physical and broken devices on which they were made, and an oral history of practices which gets lost or changed over time. Therefore, it is of primary importance that we both archive our work individually and collectively to take control of those processes, and also to record an oral history of practices and timelines and have control of that process as well. Asking the traditional art establishment to critique, write about, or show glitch art or digital art in general risks at the very least misunderstanding, or at worst misrepresentation and caricature. We must control the narrative around what we do. Control the means of digital production. Understand your tools, maintain your hardware, become good at managing your files. Don't rely on big tech to keep a record of your work. Fight the scourge of bit rot and dead links. Record our shared history. And finally, the final slide. And this is kind of almost of primary importance to me in my own practice. I neither use or endorse Apple products or proprietary or Apple hardware or software. No, none of that was used in the preparation of this talk, which was written on completely Libre operating systems, Triskel, Gunos, and Pure OS, and partly written on a Libre-booted Dell Latitude E6400 from 2009. And that's it.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I don't know if you can saw this, Laura was posting, looks like a deep dream. And thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's so amazing. Wow. And also this reference to David Sylvian and the ghost. And thank you for that. That's great. It's a reference, you know, it's a link to the second chapter of our book. And it's so nice. All the contributions getting connected now. It's really spooky. What I'm thinking was, let's make an exhibition together, please.
Yeah, we can do that.
Please. It's so nice, so nice. Thank you for that. So, not easy to questions. Okay.
Questions.
I don't have questions. I'm so full of everything, and it's really giving me missing links of several topics and issues, and so yeah, let's open the audience.
Questions, anybody?
Other questions, yeah, than I.
3 messages there as well.
Well, thank you for the lecture. It was very, very interesting. It's very interesting what you said, that now we live in the modern generation, that the artwork can maybe not last as long if it's not looked after well. So like an old painting can last many, many centuries, but
yes,
you have to be very careful to look after your own work, and like you say, individually and collectively, because the danger is you can lose that. All that work and all that effort can disappear without a trace. And also big tech obviously can ruin these things. So very interesting.
That's why I talk about moderation policies, because the big thing that happened with Tumblr back in 2017, 2018, when it was brought up, it was one of the main breeding grounds for glitch art then. And so many different blogs disappeared. I mean, there's a guy called Domenico Dombara who's crucially important. He's worked a lot with John Cates, and they kind of came up with the idea of dirty new media, which is kind of talking about new media rather than it being kind of this perfect representation of digital stuff. Like, and we have this idea that digital stuff is perfect. It's you know, the whole Photoshop thing where everything's made perfect, but really it's as John Cates says, it's gritty. And that grittiness is also reflected in a lot of the artwork that was made then, where it is a lot of it is not safe for work, because what's one of the most common materials that people look at when they begin making glitch art, especially men, because they're obsessed by porn. You take porn, but there's a whole dialogue within very early work on Tumblr which just disappeared. So there's a whole conversation that was being had then which is gone. Unless it's on archive.org's Wayback Machine. They did do a very good job of saving a lot of stuff, but there's artists, as I say, like Dominique Dombara, he just didn't even realize that was happening, or there's a way to retrieve his work. So I actually had to say, oi, get your work off there. So yeah, I mean, we are, if we don't control our own stuff, then we are prey to, as you say, big tech or websites going down. It's of primary importance. It really is. And we are as a community in the background starting to realize that and work on things to save work or to archive it, things that we as a community think are good or interesting or of importance. Yeah. So it is save your work, back up your hard drives.
Yeah, but you know, in the old days when you were, writing a document and you deleted it, it disappeared. You used to be able to get specialist people that could recover the document. Is that possible? That's possible.
God, yeah, I've done it. I've accidentally overwritten some of my own hard drives. There's software that you can recover loads of stuff from it, either through Windows, or I do it like, obviously I work in Linux mainly. I don't like Windows. But yeah, it's
obviously like into iCloud. When it backs it up, it can disappear from there forever. Yes.
Yeah. If you choose to use Apple products, yes, which I don't, because they're evil. So
no, I don't. But yeah.
But yes, it's you can't allow your work to be. You can't presume that a website is going to be there in 10 years' time. Google might not be there in 10 years' time. So all the stuff you have on Google Drive, that's just going to disappear if they go down. I think there was a case a couple of months ago where a whole swathe of Google documents just disappeared. Somebody pressed the wrong button somewhere and it just gone. So.
And will there be maybe a problem in the future where you have to reformat your digital glitch work into another type of format, and
that's problematical, because a lot of the stuff we make relies on a specific format to have a specific look or a feel. Like if you look at, say, as I talked about, the differences in texture between H.261, which is one of the very, very earliest video formats, and H.264, they're completely different textural wise. Totally different. So I mean, if you say, should we save this in a new format to make it future proof, or in the future go, I better change to this new format, it's going to change the work. I mean, I don't have a problem with changing. In a sense, it's a remix of an original work. It's not the original, but that's okay as well. But I mean, if you want something to retain the original artifacts or the original look and feel of something, then you have to use the original codec, I think, definitely. So it's a conundrum that everybody's facing, I think, that works digitally, not just glitch artists. So I mean, there are things. I think MDisk is a disk where you can store loads of material on. They're supposed to last 100, 200 years or something like that. But
MDisk is not being manufactured anymore.
Is it not?
No, it's not.
My God, that's outrageous. How dare they? You see, we're at the victims of this. So are they still making the players for it, though? That's the question.
No, they stopped making the players, too.
Oh, my God. Wow.
Dead format because nobody's using...
Yeah.
There's still a warehouse full of them somewhere. So they're still on the market. You can still buy them.
Yeah.
The company manufacturing is no longer manufacturing, as far as I know.
Yeah. I mean, that's down to, again, it's like hardware. Hardware is really important to preserve hardware that you may have made work on in the past, I think. I mean, we're all, if we don't control that, then we're going to be victims of that stuff disappearing. So it's kind of, we have to be tech savvy more so than generations of artists before us. I mean, yes, you had to learn how to make pigments and all the rest of it, and drying times, and how to proof your canvases and all the rest of it. But I find it constantly baffling that I meet artists who don't understand the basic technology that they work on, and basic fixes, technical self-sufficiency. You know, we have to be very, very self-sufficient in our own work as artists, I think, definitely. And be aware of those technical issues. I mean, I hadn't realized that MDisc had disappeared.
Yeah. The issues you're talking about, the same issues that video is having.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel sorry for the people like Graham Weinbrand who's doing stuff with CAV laser discs.
Wow.
Try finding a player.
Well, again, I mean, that's why open source technology is important, where we have open source designs that people upload. I think I saw an article with a YouTube video attached where people were working out how to archive laser discs, the original big LP things, and they'd come up with and they come up with this device that you can attach it into your laserdisc player, so you can actually archive everything onto your computer. But I mean, you're talking about, I think they were saying there's something like 160 gigabytes worth of information created just from one laserdisc. Yeah, but still, like, if you're trying to store it, like, you've got like 300 or 400 of those,
you have a problem.
Yeah, that's the thing. We keep creating more and more information. How do we store it? I mean, I know that storage volumes get bigger and bigger. I mean, I've personally on the side here, I've got my main archive computer, which has got 12 terabytes, but those 12 terabytes are also backed up onto another 12 terabytes as a secondary copy. And that doesn't include my laptops. I mean, you know, I understand storage stuff is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, but then there's also cost. Like, if you're in the third world, how are you going to afford that? Like, you know, I mean, there's loads of artists. There's loads of artists in South America, Brazil, places like that, who are coming up with some amazing glitch art. But then, you know, there's one guy in particular, I won't mention his name, but he's in seriously dire financial straits at the moment. I mean, how is he going to back up this work that he's doing? Like, if his device goes, that's it, it's gone. Like, it's, I mean, opportunity cost, access cost, it's all, you know, we're very, very, I'm very, very privileged to like have all this equipment around me. And yeah, so keeping equipment going and recycling it as much as possible, making it usable is good, I think. Yeah. That's, sorry, I'm going off on a rant about hardware.
So when I'm listening to this conversation as a curator, it's very important to consider for the future about working on archives, and also involve curators that they understand what you are doing. So I mean, at the moment it's always like this, the glitch artists are also the creators and the editors and everything, so, and the managers, and so, but it's really, it's a good step now. You know, I posted this.
How do you explain to somebody what this is? Why it's so important?
Yeah, to think about that. But I mean, it's just the first step. You know, in Germany last week, in Munich, in the Pinakothek der Moderne opened the first institutional, very professional, very nice, very amazing exhibition about glitch, die Kunst der Störung. Rosa was also there, and we were really amazed how many people coming for looking at the glitch. So we were just a little bit in glitch heaven. And also with what happened with Sotheby's and all this hustle there, which was very, very interesting.
Yes.
Also because of the feminism. I loved it to see how aware the community is. And even especially what Patrick Amadon was doing, that he said, I don't know, I don't want to be a part of this exhibition when it's like this. And he created after that his own exhibition in Lisbon and things like this, and in Hong Kong also. I really love what he is doing, and also the political implications of all that. Yeah, so it's an amazing consens, even if the community is so international. I mean, that's to me, it's so wonderful, because I mean, I grew up in a generation where flying and connecting with international artists. So we were jetting around before Corona, and that's, I mean, it's still there. Yeah, it's still there, and it's so interesting to see that that we have now here a very international meeting through, I don't know how many continents now. I hope that the Dubai friends also coming later. So yeah, I mean, we were talking about these. Please think of archives. I know that in your office it's an archive collection. And yeah, so I mean, yeah, that's really, really important. Other questions?